The date was April 12, 1861. The place, Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The same country that had started as the more perfect union established by the Constitution had turned into two regions divided by bitter sectionalism in less than 100 years. As the first shots of the American Civil War were fired at 4:30 a.m., it became clear that compromise was no longer possible. What followed was the single most decisive event in United States history, taking more lives than any other American war combined. Diplomacy was vital for both sides, as the Confederates discerned the possibility that the only chance they may have of winning lay in recognition from outside powers. Abraham Lincoln recognized this and focused his diplomatic efforts on preventing any recognition from occurring. But on November 8, 1861, both the Confederates and the Union would be put to the test when an international diplomatic crisis known as the Trent Affair would risk European intervention in the splitting of the United States of America forever. Soon after Jefferson Davis was elected the President of the Confederate States of America, one of his priorities was to secure diplomatic recognition from England and other European powers.
Confederate military technology compared to the Union military technology was decidedly inferior, and so foreign intervention would have gone a long way to even out some of the capabilities of the Confederacy on the battlefield.
On May 13, 1861, the Queen of England issued a formal proclamation of neutrality, granting Confederacy status as a belligerent. However, the Confederacy still wanted formal recognition. They hoped to appeal to British self-interest by reminding them that the mutual needs based on cotton tied them together. This strategy of using king cotton diplomacy could have been very successful, as cotton from America provided the fuel behind the British textile industry. Davis had appointed two diplomats, James Mason and John Slidell, to gain British and French recognition. Slidell and Mason left from Havana on the British Royal Mail packet Trent on November 7, 1861, planning to go to England, then France. On the Union side, a crusty scientist and explorer named Captain Charles Wilkes commanded the USS San Jacinto. He planned to intercept the ship and take the diplomats without orders. Wilkes justified his actions by reasoning that the two agents were bent on mischievous and traitorous errands against the country and were therefore qualified as contrabands, subject to seizure by a United States ship. On November 8th, the San Jacinto spotted the Trent and stopped the ship. The junior officer sent aboard had specific instructions from Wilkes to seize Mason and Slidell, their two secretaries, and their diplomatic papers. He was then to confiscate the Trent as a prize of war. Wilkes's actions were not justified under international law. His removal of agents claiming protection under a neutral flag had violated the principle of freedom of the seas and insulted British honor. The Northern press immediately exalted Wilkes's actions, calling them heroic, significant, and important to the war effort.
When news of the Trent Affair reached the North, you have a very exuberant Northern public who they're very happy about what had happened there. This is a public that's in desperate need of a victory of some sort. The war had been going very poorly for them before this, so when news of Wilkes' capturing of Mason and Slidell had reached them, they're initially very happy about it. They don't understand the international consequences of this.
The Southerners were equally ecstatic, but for the opposite reasons. Wilkes's breach of international law encouraged tension between the Union and Britain. Jefferson Davis and his cabinet foresaw English recognition on their behalf in the near future. These hopes were further strengthened when the news made it across the Atlantic. Instead of excitement, the news in Britain was met with fury and outrage. An American in London wrote to William Seward, the American Secretary of State, that the people are frantic with rage, and were the country polled, I fear 999 men out of 1,000 would declare for immediate war. The British government demanded the immediate return of the diplomats and a formal apology with a threat of war. For 7 confrontational weeks, William Seward and Abraham Lincoln debated the decision. On one hand, they could refuse to grant Britain their demands and face war. It was clear that President Lincoln would have public opinion behind him if he chose to support Wilkes. People were happy to accept the Trent Affair as a Union victory and savor the insult to Great Britain. Lincoln and Seward's other option was to capitulate to Britain and undergo national humiliation. On December 23rd, Lincoln met with his cabinet and they debated the pros and cons of the choices. Ultimately, arguable legalities became secondary to practical realities. The defeat of both England and the South was not possible. Lincoln famously stated, "One war at a time," and then resolved to release the diplomats. William Seward now had the daunting responsibility of drafting a note that camouflaged their submission to England. In his document, Seward admitted that Wilkes had violated international law by not taking the diplomatic papers and the Trent itself, but had acted correctly, though without orders, in stopping a neutral ship carrying contraband. The United States refused to grant an apology, but freed Mason and Slidell and awarded reparations.
Seward's own diplomatic touch certainly played a part in this. The language he uses in the dispatches to Great Britain is very interesting. You have him describing these prisoners as relative little importance to the Union, and in fact you see that he writes that they will be cheerfully liberated, which has the effect, I think, of saying that Great Britain is blowing this out of proportion, that this really isn't of that much material importance to the United States. We have bigger, or to the Union, we have bigger issues at hand than these two prisoners, and it's kind of almost saying that Great Britain is acting a little bit childish out of this.
Through diplomatic brilliance, Seward was able to preserve the United States' honor while appeasing the British demands. Although the immediate effect of the Trent Affair hurt Anglo-American relations, eventually it strengthened the Great Britain and American relationship. The resolution of the crisis ruined the Confederacy's hopes of gaining European recognition. Richmond editor E.A. Pollard later wrote that the peaceful settlement of the Trent Affair had provided a sharp check to the long-cherished imagination of the interference of England in the war.
In thinking about the Trent Affair, it's something that the Confederacy could have used perhaps to catapult it into a position of strength, but it was not able to leverage that power. And so when the Union was able to patch over its differences with England, it just made it more difficult for the Confederacy to find some kind of common ground.
It created a feeling in Great Britain that the United States was prepared to defend itself when necessary, but recognized its responsibility to comply with international law. Moreover, it produced a feeling in Great Britain and France that peace could be preserved as long as the Europeans maintained strict neutrality in regard to the American belligerent.
Credibility is at the root of a lot of our problems and a lot of the reasons that we go to war. And yet, in this case, you have men like Seward, like Lincoln, who are willing to put this issue behind them and willing to maybe compromise or even sacrifice some issues of credibility for the pursuit of peace.
Mason and Slidell continued on their journey after their release, but failed in both England and France to gain recognition. After 4 long years of fighting the Civil War, the Confederacy surrendered in 1865. The Union had won the war, not only at home, but overseas as well. By keeping Europe out of their affairs, it proved that the United States could once again be a powerful country. Prior to the Trent Affair, Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy were predicting European intervention. This unquestionably would have led to the permanent division of the United States and the prevention of the development of the powerful nation we know today. But on November 8, 1861, the incident known as the Trent Affair forced the Union and Britain to choose between compromise and war. Although the Trent Affair was originally seen as a failure of international diplomacy with humiliating consequences, it ultimately became a success that saved the country. The diplomatic resolution, engineered brilliantly by William Seward and Abraham Lincoln, was crucial to saving the Union. The strong nation that developed, saved by this diplomatic crisis, has profoundly influenced world history. But all of America's accomplishments go back to the naval captain's actions without orders, the near Third Anglo-American War, and Seward's diplomatic genius, which translated to the preservation of the Union. History would be changed forever.